Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a segment of Community Social Justice. Tonight, we are talking all about children's mental health. My name is Dr. Cornell Daniel Grigsby. I am a school psychologist, so if you've ever needed to speak to a school psychologist but you don't have the time, this is the evening for you to join in with us, have the conversation as we delve into the topic about children's mental health. So if you're a parent of a child, whether they're in elementary school, middle, or high school, if they're out of school, they're in college, they're working, and you're still concerned about your child, you still have questions, come to the chat today. We want to make sure that you're engaging in the conversation, you're listening to what we have to say. We have two amazing guests that's going to be speaking with us about this topic, so we are really excited to have you guys on. I wanted to just give you a few upcoming events that we have. We do these talks every week, so for next week, we'll be talking about Triumph Over Trauma, and it'll be Friday at 7 p.m. So if that's also something that is of interest to you, please be sure to join in. But I know it's been a long week. COVID has been giving everyone a run for their money, but if you have questions about mental health, if this is a topic that is interesting to you or something that you aren't sure how to start the conversation with your children or with family members, then please be sure to join on so you can ask us questions. We are here to have those conversations with you this evening. I'm really excited to talk about this because I often don't get to speak to a lot of parents at one time, as well as educators. So if you work in the schools, I worked in the schools for a while, so I'm familiar with that perspective as well. We want to be here to support you guys this evening and give you information that you can actually use, because it's nice to have stuff that you can actually do. So if you have any questions, please be sure to stay in. Also, follow us on social media, Community Social Justice, ATL. Make sure that you're keeping up to date with all the amazing events that we have going on. So we're really excited to have this conversation this evening, like I said. If you guys have any specific questions, we'd love to have you interact with us in the chat. So make sure that you're commenting down below on whatever streaming platform that you're using to listen to this conversation, especially on Facebook. Be sure to engage there. I'm also very excited to bring on our guest in a little bit that will be talking about this. We're going to get a perspective from a parent who has a personal experience with mental health when it comes to their own child, as well as another community leader who you guys may be quite familiar with. So when you see that person, just put a comment down below. If you have been following these conversations for a while, if you're familiar with Community Social Justice, ATL, you'll know who that person is. And we want to hear from you guys. So we're going to bring on our first guest, Miss Eva Parks. So if you could, girl, show that beautiful face and let us know who you are and what you're going to be talking to us about this evening. Hello.
Well, hello. Thank you so much. My name is Eva Parks. I am currently a school manager for Upper Elementary School here in the city. But most importantly, I'm a parent. And this topic is so near and dear to my heart because I do have one of my children, my 5-year-old son, who has been diagnosed with autism and ADHD. And so this was very important to me, and I'm so glad to be here. So thank you for having me.
No, you are welcome. Thank you for gracing us with your presence and also with your perspective, because I'm looking forward to learning so much from you this evening. I think you have a great wealth of information to share with all the viewers. So thank you again. We have one more guest that's going to be joining us as well. Mr. Mel Smith, you can pop on in and say hello to the people.
Yes, good evening, everyone. It is truly a privilege to be on Community Social Justice Atlanta. I am Mel Smith. I serve in different capacities within the community of Georgia. I service Henry County, Clayton County, DeKalb, and Fulton County. I have an organization called Mentoring Exceptional Leaders, and we have the opportunity to partner with so many different community partners. So I'm excited about tonight's conversations with you lovely ladies. So thank you for having me. I'm excited. Let's go.
Okay, so as we start the conversation, it's definitely important that we give some background on our individual perspective. So myself as a school psychologist, I often work with parents who have children either with a diagnosis or a disability in the schools. I've also worked in private practice, but I want to hear from you guys. First, Ms. Eva, if you can share, what is your, why is mental health important to you from a child, in a child's perspective?
In a child's perspective, I mean, it's important to me overall because it's one of those topics that a lot of times is seen as being taboo. And so I feel like it's really important to share light on it or shed light on it. And particularly for me, having a child who's been diagnosed with a mental illness, in order to help him get better, I think it's important to kind of erase the stigma, erase the shame, get more and more people, particularly people of color, educated about it. And so therefore they're not afraid or they're not ashamed or they are not confused about when or how to seek help. And so for me, even though this is Mental Health Awareness Month, it's important every single day of the year, because so many of us are lacking that knowledge. So many of us are lacking the wherewithal to go and get help. And particularly for our children, they tend to fall through the cracks when they're children, and then more importantly, they become adults. And so, I don't want to see that happen. And so I feel it's very important to share until you can't share anymore. So that's
absolutely. Yes, and I agree with you. So I have a few statistics. So the researcher in me can't go without giving some stats, So the CDC reports that 1 in 5 children experiences some form of mental illness. But like you said, Eva, there is a huge stigma in our community around the idea of being diagnosed and receiving care for that diagnosis. So thank you for sharing that point. And Mr. Mel, from your perspective, with that prevalence level being so high, can you give some perspective on maybe where that stigma is coming from? What is your thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. I believe personally, through standardized testing and some of the labels that our students have received just from the systemic side, whether it be through the media, whether it be through the school system. But for me personally, I think even sometimes in our own communities and the cultures that we create, sometimes we create a stigma amongst our own people and students because we don't quite understand the different personalities and learning capabilities. So for me, I think even in the Black church, and I'll say it this way, sometimes we quote a lot of scripture, we pray, but we forget to deal with the day-to-day practical application of some of the things we know to be true. Now, I know Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way we should go, and when it grows older, will not depart from it. But sometimes I think even with the scripture, you have to be very sensitive how we're shaping and structuring our curriculum and how we're disciplining and directing our children. So that's my perspective on it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And Ms. Eva, because you have a child, like you said, that has been diagnosed, can you share with us some of the stigmas that maybe you've encountered with different individuals through that process of getting your child diagnosed and seeking treatment?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So if I can start from the beginning, from the time he was born up until about 6-7 months, I kind of felt that something was different. But because he could talk, but because he could walk, those were the things that were focused on. And so when it was brought to my attention by one of his teachers, hey, you might want to get him tested just to see, because I want him to reach his full potential. And I got him tested, and lo and behold, the diagnosis came back. When it came time to share that from family members to well-meaning friends, him, are you sure? Mm-hmm. Is that really the case? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, yeah, we've gone through the different assessments. It's not like it's a 20-minute thing. This thing takes several weeks at a time. We've been back and forth. So yes, I'm sure that I'm sure. And so the stigma that was levied towards us was A, you need to pray it out. B, he just need a whooping.
Mm-hmm.
C, just talk to him more. Or D, ain't nothing wrong with him because he's so smart. Not understanding, like Pastor Mel said, there are so many layers to it all, and you can't just look at one thing and just kind of brush it off. And so whether it was, well, don't tell anybody because we don't want him to be labeled, to, well, just don't worry about it because he'll grow out of it. Those are some tip of the iceberg of some of the things we experienced once he was diagnosed.
And so with all of that, what would you say kind of motivated you to keep going and pursue those services for him even after the diagnosis and getting all that backlash in some regard?
So even after getting all the backlash and actually going through kind of like those layers of acceptance and grief myself and understanding what it was going to take, and it was going to be a lifelong commitment, because I consider myself a parent that's plugged in, and because my children are dear and dear to my heart, in my mind, it's like, how dare I not try to seek the best treatment for him? How dare I not try to do everything I know to do within my power, within my coinage in my wallet, to make sure that I'm getting him everything that he needs? So there was no reason, there was no excuse that I can fathom as to why I wouldn't do that. Whether somebody was telling me I shouldn't, whether circumstances were telling me I couldn't, it was going to happen, because how dare I not? So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so it can be kind of frustrating, I think, especially as a professional in the field with mental health, because I'll see parents spend money on everything else. You get your kids the best shoes, you put them in the best schools, you get them the best Christmas gifts. You want to decorate their room. But when it comes to seeking services from the mental health perspective, I think just accepting that this is something that you can't necessarily control can be challenging, and it can be difficult to want to invest in those types of services, even without the diagnosis. So we have kids who aren't diagnosed, but we see the behaviors, right? And they could benefit from therapy. They could benefit from some kind of supports and services, but sometimes it's easier to just ignore that because we don't know what to do. And so, Mel, from your perspective, give us some thoughts on maybe where you see parents struggling with reaching out to those or receiving those services or even wanting to have them from your perspective working in the church.
Well, first of all, I think sometimes it's the lack of knowledge, not necessarily knowing where to go and to find credible resources that can help them address some of the situations. And sometimes it's the first time that they've been presented with such content or information. So now it's an unknown factor. What do I do now? Where do I go? Who can I call? And back to what Eva was sharing as it relates to sometimes the shame associated with certain things. And I think for me personally, I think one of the things we can do is really take a look at some of the assessments and really look at them and determine, kind of where do we go as it relates as a team. So it's not just the child, it's the parent, it's the teacher, it's the counselor, it's the principal, it's even the pastor or the youth pastor. I think it's a collective, a collaborative effort to make sure that this child is educated, equipped, and prepared for a higher level of living as well as learning. So I think it's a holistic approach that we really have to look at, so it's not one-dimensional. So as we continue to look for ways to provide insight and information to help this child, I think we need to educate the entire support group.
And when we talk about the stigma of praying things out, right? So from a ministerial perspective, Mel, when we have these things happening in church, because I even know myself, I remember seeing individuals visit the church and I could tell something was going on with them. And they just brought them to the altar. And it's like, that's great. However, they're going to leave with those same challenges. So what's your perspective on, that whole perspective? Because I think a lot of people just want to lean on that. Let's just pray it out. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I'm glad you bring up that question, just because a lot of times we come to church, we've been taught we can pray, we can read the scripture, and we can give it to God. But God also gives us wisdom. He also gives us people with knowledge and a support system and resources. I mean, I do still believe God is our ultimate source. He is a healer, but also he puts people in our lives to help us. And sometimes I think we lack in the ecclesiastical arena, a circle, the proper training that's needed. Being able to not only identify certain situations, but where do we go? And then sometimes just being honest enough to say we don't know, and having a directory or resource pool that we can direct people to that actually have more insight than we do. I'll give you an example. I can tell you what to take for a headache, but if your migraine continues, I'm going to recommend a physician that's licensed. So for me, I think sometimes it's just a matter of us being trained, making sure our lay people are equipped, our ministers and our support systems acknowledge the fact that it takes more than just prayer. It takes the actual hands-on experience and people such as yourself, Dr. Grisby. So we're glad to combine with some of the resources that are inside of our church. We also have to go sometimes outside of the wall to get the appropriate assistance that's needed to address the situation.
For sure. And when we think about young kids, especially, because I know a lot of times I have a 4-year-old son, and I saw some things that concern me as a mom, not only because I'm in this profession, just because that's my baby. And, when you ask people, they give you those, oh, just wait, boys develop slower. They need a little more time. But you kind of know, like you said, Eva, that it was pretty early on that you recognized I needed help. And you mentioned that someone recommended that you get that, that evaluation done. So if you could talk a little bit about the importance of that community and making that first step and acknowledging that maybe what you're seeing is not, you're not crazy. You're not making stuff up. Like, talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said before, just being a plugged in parent, there were things that I felt were different, but because I didn't have the knowledge base behind it, I didn't know what to call it. I could put my finger on it and say, I just don't see that happening with other people's kids, but I didn't know what to call it. So here we are, everybody's kids are sleeping through the night. However, mine is only sleeping 4 hours at a time or going hours on hours, just banging their head. And I just had to find a safe spot to put them in. And so when his teacher pulled me to the side, and I loved her for it. Well, I have to say, when she told me about it, again, I went through those 7 stages of acceptance. She's going, maybe you need to go and get him seen by someone. Now, this was after he had been in school and he had been acclimated, but every day was another challenge. Every day was something different. but yet and still he could walk and he could talk. And that was all his doctors were concerned about. Can he walk? Can he talk? Okay, yes, he's good to go. But we're not talking about we're having to do the same thing 10 times before we can even get out the door. We're not talking about if something's different in his world, we cannot make it throughout the day. And so when she expressed that, I'm like, okay, once I kind of internalized it, got over it, said, okay, this is what you've been looking for. Now let's go. Let's understand what to do. I began to look at the insurance and see, okay, are there places to get him tested? And guess what? There were none that were accepted by the insurance. And so I had to call around to these different places and say, hey, do you take a sliding scale fee? And after about 7 tries, I found a psychologist who did take one, and the rest is history. And then you go through the assessments, you stick with it, and he finally received his official diagnosis, even though I felt something was there and didn't know where to start. But if you start in one place, there's so much information that's out there. If you can just find the door to be open to figure out what to do, then the rest can come.
Absolutely. And Pastor Mel, I know when you're kind of on the other side in the church forum or even in the community and you're working with individuals that you may not know initially that they have, a child that's going through this, how do you kind of deal or how do you help support them when they're feeling frustrated or guilty about, asking those questions, why my child, why would God do this to me? Why would they punish me with a child who has these difficulties because I don't know what to do? What do you have to say to that?
Well, first of all, I think the biggest thing is we have to learn how to listen to what's being said verbally and non-verbally. I think sometimes we go right in with scripture or the solution when we're not listening. And I think the other part outside of listening is loving and appreciation where that child is, as well as their parent at that particular moment, because it is an emotional time period for everyone involved. Mm-hmm. So outside of listening and loving on the person, I think the other part is learning about the resources that can help a child actually have a clear and thoughtful, rigorous learning regimen for that particular child. But as it relates to the mental health side, I think sometimes we don't want to identify or put in certain things in perspective. Some of it is not academic. We have to look at it from a holistic standpoint. Some things are emotional, some things are mental, some things are spiritual. But as we talk about the mental space, there is a place where I believe that there should be some type of biblical counseling provided for a child or even a family member. Give that person that opportunity to talk about the things that they're feeling, their emotions, and not only just what they're feeling, but also allowing them to express kind of what some of their struggles may be and some of the obstacles that they're faced with. And it gives us an opportunity then to make a fair assessment as we pull back layers and dig a little bit deeper. And we decide, okay, what will be some alternatives as far as the learning? It may not necessarily be the curriculum. It may actually be the methodology behind what we're doing. So I think sometimes we have to look at how the classroom is structured and look at how the family is structured. The other part about that from an emotional and mental standpoint could be very well, that child could be very well experiencing some form of trauma. But I think as we probe and we dig a little deeper, it allows us to see more so we can actually diagnose and then also provide the proper resources to help that child as well as that family.
Yeah, and so we are talking a lot about working with children directly, which is very important. But one thing that I do want to bring up, and this is to all the listeners, not only us on the panel, but all the listeners who are, grocery shopping, folding clothes at home, probably thinking, this is probably a conversation I need to have with my child. I often ask parents to step back and think about yourself. Have you done the full assessment of you and recognize kind of what you are going through, what you've experienced that you may not have, you are coping with it, right? You know how to make it through the day, but it's still a challenge for you. And so that's equally as important. So as a school psychologist myself, it's definitely important that I help parents step back and look at themselves first. So you're Eva first, right? And then your mom, that's one concept. I'm Cornell first, and then I'm a mom. On top of all the other things. So we just want to keep that in mind as well. But I do want to quickly reintroduce the show for any new listeners that we have. This is an amazing topic that we're discussing on Community Social Justice Atlanta. We're focusing specifically on children's mental health. So if you have children, if you work with children, then you need to be paying attention because this is something that could change the trajectory of the kids that you work with. We want to make sure that you have the tools to make sure that these kids are doing exactly what they need to do and they're reaching their goals. So we actually have another special guest who is ready to pop in. I don't know if y'all are ready, but she is here. Come on, Miss Natalie Ellis. Welcome to the stage. Introduce the people who you are.
Thank you so much.
Love the glasses, by the way.
Yes, thank you so much.
Tell us who you are.
I apologize for my tardy. I was just wrapping up a session, so my apologies. So I'm Natalie Ellis. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Georgia, and I work a lot with children as well as families, women, teenagers. So this is such an important topic, bringing awareness to children and families. And the sooner kids can be aware and families can be aware of this topic and of all the issues that come along with our mental health, then it puts us a step ahead. So this is really great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I love the frames, first of all, because they are adding some seasoning to this conversation. So go ahead. So being that you work directly with individuals in the field, what's your target audience? Give us a little background on who you serve when it comes to your services.
Well, it seems as if primarily now my target audience are women. So I would say primarily from 20 to 50, so women, right? And I loved what you said, Miss Cornell, Dr. Cornell. Okay. and when you said that we're first, the woman first, right? Eva's the first, and then she's a mom, right? And that's something we often miss, especially within this society, because again, as we become partners and as we become moms, then society teaches us that that's what becomes important, right? So
Absolutely.
Ourself is kind of put aside, but we have to remember ourselves first, because when we and self-care is about that, right? Because when we're at our best, we could be our best for the children around us, for our husbands and our partners. So, and the work is the work starts with us. If I expect my children to be better, I have to first do the work that I need to be better, so that I could be the model for them, and I can be the teacher for them, and I can be all the things for them. So that's really important.
Yes, well, that's a whole nother segment right there on how we can model the behaviors that we want. And I want to make sure everybody can see these frames, Miss Natalie. So if you could shift yourself. Come on now. There we go. There we go. That changes things. Okay. I see the whole cat eye now. I'm ready. I'm excited. So thank you. And I love having your perspective. It's really important that we look at it from one side, where we have Eva's going in as a parent seeking support and help, right? And you are the recipient of that on the other end, giving those services. So if you could quickly just give us a perspective from how would you suggest a parent take those first steps from the work that you've done over the years?
Yeah. Again, one of the things you said too, parents need to be paying attention. We need to be paying attention to ourselves and what's going on with ourselves, and also be paying attention to our children. And more likely, I tell parents, if you're under stress, more likely your child is probably under stress too, because kids feel us, right? They feel our energy, they feel what's going on. And again, it's a myth to think that kids don't know what's happening and that kids are immune to stuff. And kids are not. Kids are they're humans, they're people, just a younger version.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And so when we got things going on, we need to also be checking in with our children to see what's going on with our children, and seek the help. There's help out there. There's resources out there. There's tools out there. It's okay. It's okay to ask for help, and that takes nothing away from you as a parent. It takes nothing away from your strength. It takes nothing away from you, right? And so again, this is important work, because again, we have to break the stigmas, right? The stigmas of mental health, the stigmas of seeking resources, the stigmas of whatever's going on, whether it's depression, anxiety, and as we know, right, with the state of affairs right now, a lot of people are suffering. A lot of people are in pain. Children are suffering. Children are in pain. And if we want to get a handle on that, we have to talk about it. We have to bring it to the awareness. We have to shed light to these things. And the way to do that, we must talk about it. And again, we have to break the shame, right? Because the more we don't talk about things, the worse things get. Because we become more ashamed of it. We want to hide it. We want to, pretend, dismiss, do all that. And things just gets bigger. And so what I often tell my clients, when my clients are coming in my office, there's usually a compilation of things that they're bringing, right? And like I tell him, it's great that you came, right? It's great that you came. But so anytime we're noticing things, it's never too early to start doing the work, that internal work for ourselves. It's never too early. Never too early for the child. It's never too early. So
and
I think the first step is make that call.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that point up about that early intervention. What I often see is that parents who can do and parents who can't won't, right? So a lot of issues we come up with is money. So I can't afford to take my child to see someone. I can't afford to have that conversation. And so I'm going to ask everyone the same question. So we're just going to go in order. And I want you guys to think about it. When you have someone come to you with the same concern either that you had with your child at a young age, who are you going to? Like, who do you want to ask for that support? And Natalie, if you can prepare maybe 2 suggestions for a parent who is in a position where maybe they have insurance and they can go that route, who you would suggest, and then for a parent who may not have the resources financially to provide that service or to seek out that service, how would you kind of have them navigate it? But I want, Eva, from your perspective, where would you go now that you've gone through being a plugged-in parent and understanding the journey? Where would you send a coworker, girlfriend, anyone who comes to you and they're like, I think I'm experiencing the same thing, but I don't know where to start? Where would you send them?
Okay, so I'm just going to go from the standpoint of something that pretty much everybody has access to now. And it's simple. You got Google, and that's real. You start with Google to see who's in your area. What are the free services that, are being given that maybe you may not have thought about doing that before, but you can ask Google pretty much anything. So number 1, start with Google. And then number 2, I would start with the school, because a lot of the resources that you may not be able to tap into from the private sector, they may be offered by the school system, but a lot of times you just don't know because you don't ask. And so Google and the school system, 2 very simple resources that you can go to without having to have a lot of monetary resources.
Yes, and the schools, I want to share for any parent, especially being a school psychologist, the schools have a social worker. If it's not one for that building, it's one for a few buildings, but they have a resource list with all the different providers that you can have. And not even just from a mental health perspective. If you need a dentist, if you need a doctor who can work with you, if you need a food bank, there's so much that the schools get funding for to get that resource. And it often goes just completely untapped because parents don't ask. But I come up with the mindset, closed mouths don't get fed. Like you said, Eva, you have to speak up. But part of that is being confident in what you're speaking up about. And if you're facing something that you've never seen before, you don't even know what questions to ask, to be honest, right? And maybe it is taking a teacher to say, I think something's wrong, to confirm that, you go that route. So for any parent who, if you have in the pit of your stomach and you're listening tonight that you feel like something's off, I'm telling you, from a professional standpoint, it might be, right? As a mom, we have intuitions, we know. And we just need to run with it. Like, don't waste time, because early intervention is the best. No day is better than yesterday to get help for your child. Today's great, but yesterday was good too. So let's move on that for sure. So definitely thank you for bringing up the schools. I think that's a great place to start. And Mel, from your perspective, working in the communities and the church, if you had a church member or community member that said, I need help for my child, what would you offer them? Where would you ask them to go to get that help?
Well, I think the answer has been answered in a way. The school system is definitely a great resource because we do partner in education with several schools. We work with the school social worker, in some cases, maybe a case manager, the principals, the counselors, and the parent. I think it's a matter of us looking at certain situations and talking about the behaviors. And I think because a child does not create a particular environment at home, that environment sometimes spills over into the classroom and other areas. So we can actually really go back to the parent first. The parent is always my first person of contact to ask them, who's at home? What's happening at home? What are you doing to help this child excel academically, emotionally, and in other areas of space? And if they don't have the answer, I'm going to the school and I'm asking, do you know your principal's name? Do you know your counselor? Do you know what resources are available? And as we look at some of the behavior models as it relates to the teacher and the student, do you know what your child's academic GPA is? I mean, there's some basic questions even beyond the academic piece, but I think for me, from a church standpoint, I'm tapping into the resources that are internal, but external, I think we have more of an opportunity to find out who is this child spending most of their time with, and that would be in the school section. So for me, I'm going to the school asking them, okay, I tapped into the student, I've tapped into the teacher, and now we're looking at this, how can we all collectively work together to find a way to help this child to excel? So we're creating a framework to help this child to excel at a higher level of performance, not only academically, but behaviorally. We can all watch the assessments and the metric pieces of this child's development. And as that child is developing, we can work together, and then we can pray along the way. But I think it's a holistic approach.
Yes, we got to pray. We got to pray Sunday to Sunday.
That's right.
Monday through Friday at school, we got to do something too. It's important. And, you know, I put a lot of pressure on the schools because you make a good point, Mel. That's where they're spending most of their time. Our kids are at school a lot during the day. Well, COVID's different. But, you know, in a typical setting, the kids are there a lot. And so it does put a lot of responsibility on school personnel to know what to do. And part of that, because I worked in the school system myself, I made it a point to get to know my students, right? So I could tell when a student was going through something that their parent may be too deep into their own difficulties to even see in that same perspective. And so that's, again, a whole nother segment on how do we better equip our school personnel to help identify and support students. But I do want all the listeners to know that if you are in a situation where you need resources and supports, please speak to the individual at the front desk is a great place to start. Go to the attendant in the front office and just say, hey, is the school counselor here? Is the school social worker here? I would like to get a resource list of different services that I can have access to for my child, for my family. And so, Ms. Natalie, you're, you know, a service outside, maybe for individuals who are private pay, who are going through insurance. And so a lot of if we're honest, a lot of our Black and brown babies are not, you know, busting out the Blue Cross Blue Shield to pay for services. So what suggestion would you have for those parents who maybe they're not getting it in the school? You know, let's be honest, maybe the school can't do it for them right now, but they still want that early intervention. What would you suggest?
Sure. Yeah, so there's a lot of pro bono services out there. So it is about, like Eva mentioned, doing the research, you know, find out what services are out there that's free. There's lots of services. I offer a lot of services that's pro bono. There's lots of programs out there that offer services. So parents have to be open and willing to do the work. But there's programs and things out there. And even with insurance, sometimes there's a lot of jobs that offer EAP programs, where employee assistant programs. So I have clients who their insurance doesn't work out. So it's like, well, have you talked to your employer about, you know, mental health services? So there's lots of things. And again, as a community, we just have to give people access and talk about things. And the more we talk about it, the more people are aware, oh, there are these things. And that's all we can do, you know, from all perspectives. School's a great place. As a therapist, I'm involved with a lot of the schools, because with the kids that I have, if they need IEPs, I go to those meetings as well. And helping the parents just kind of see what supports that the child may need. Because again, there's still, with special services in the school system, there's still a lot of stigma surrounding that. And so really having that education with parents, again, at the end of the day, it's making sure your kid is successful. Success looks different for everybody, right? How we get to success looks different for everybody. And again, helping parents understand it's what is going to help your child be successful. Each child is different. And so,
Ms. Natalie, could you give a brief, just kind of explain for everyone listening what the EAP, because that's honestly the first time I've heard that. I know that some employers will provide services, but if you could just give us a little, you know, expand on that nugget a little bit. What does that look like? How can parents get access to that?
Yeah, so a lot of people where they work offers this additional service that people are paying for. People are paying for these things. EAP is called Employee Assistance Program, where they might offer 3 free sessions or 6 free sessions or 8 free sessions outside of their insurance. And so a lot of agencies like myself, a lot of providers like myself take EAP. And so that's a program that's out there. There's lots of different EAP services. There's programs for military families called Give an Hour. At that point, if those military families sign up for that program, Give an Hour, then the services are for free for whatever providers that accepts that program. So that's a program that I offer. There's victims compensation program. So I have a lot of clients who are victims of a crime in the state of Georgia. And so through the victims compensation program, there's like lots of money available for those clients who meet eligibility, and they could get free mental health services that the victim compensation is paying for. So there's lots of programs out there that offers services, but people have to do their research. And again, people have to be willing to seek the help and be okay with seeking the help. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone was taking down some notes on that, because it is, we're getting to a point, and honestly, if we're just being blunt, that we can't keep with the excuses for why we're not addressing these concerns, right? And I am personally one that believes this is a learned behavior over time. We have gotten to a point as a community, especially people of color, where we normalize trauma, we normalize struggle, we normalize difficulties, bad behaviors, anything negative. We want to be strong, we want to overcome, because that's what society expects from us, but that will kill you. That will take you out. And your biggest concern when you work a 40-hour or sometimes 50, 60-hour job is to take care of your kids, but you're not taking care of yourself, right? So now you're not even allowing yourself to be there for the kids that you're putting all this effort in for. So we have to be aware of these services, not only for the children, but again, to my point earlier, we need to be using these EAP services for ourselves. You may need an hour and your kid need an hour, okay? Because like you said earlier, Natalie, if the parent is stressed, the child is stressed, and they are taking that stress to the school, and now they're stressing out the teacher, okay?
Absolutely.
But now they're in the office with me, and we don't want that. They don't need to be in the office with me. But if they do, we're here. So make sure y'all are using your school psychologist, because they're available for those services, and your school counselor. So definitely a very good conversation. I wish that I had this available for my mom when I was growing up, because I had a lot of anxiety. I'm a self-diagnosed anxious person, and it definitely impacted the way that I interacted with school. So it was something that I realized now that I'm as a parent, I'm so much more plugged in because of that. My own experience in my teachings, but I do realize that that's because I have a doctorate in psychology. I didn't just, grow and learn in this aspect just naturally. So for the panelists, and Ms. Eva, if you could share, what are some things that you feel you've learned now that you would tell your younger self as a parent, to help maybe be more informed and be better prepared for the journey that you're on right now with your child? What would you share?
Oh, wow. So I think, let me just say, I don't think anything could have ever prepared me for the journey, because there's no blueprint for it, even with all the literature and the books and the talks and everything every day. And Natalie is laughing. Every day is something different when it comes to this journey. But I guess if there's one, nugget of advice I would give my younger self, is like you were saying, to make sure that I take care of me, put on my oxygen mask first, because if I'm not breathing, then I can't breathe for my kids. And so I have gotten a lot better with doing that. But if I had known or had realized that it's okay to take care of me, so I'm better equipped to take care of them, and there's no shame in it, doesn't mean I'm weak, doesn't mean I'm not down, don't mean I'm not down for the cause, but I got to make sure I'm good, so that way my kids are good. I would have done that a lot sooner, and that way we could all be better at the same time.
Absolutely. Give me one tip, if you have one off the top of your head, that you use now to help make sure that you're good. What's your go-to to be good?
I go see Natalie.
Okay, come on. Networking and coordination. I like it.
And being real about it, I plug in, and that is one of my resources, because after a full week of working 60 hours, participating in ABA sessions, sometimes my cup have runneth over, and I need someone to help me say, okay, let's pour some of this stuff out, so that way you can be all that you can be in order to help take care of your kids. So she's my one outlet too. I can't want my child to go to therapy, and I'm not willing to do it myself. So we have to be the change we want to see. I have to show him that it's no shame in doing that. So she's one tip that I have. I see my therapist as well. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Natalie. We appreciate you. Got Eva up here sharing those nuggets and everything. It's important. We need to support each other. Mr. Mel, please unmute. I want to hear from your perspective, especially being a male. Now, we know that's, again, we got all these other segments coming up as we have these conversations. So as a male in this arena, how do you support yourself and then the individuals around you when it comes to mental illness?
Well, first of all, I want to say this. Actually, we are wired different as men and women, but we're human, and we're created with some of the same organs and capacities. But what I will say is self-care is important. I think everybody has to take the time out to realize what their bandwidth really is and identify how to manage imbalances, because sometimes we're top heavy because we wear multiple hats as adults. for me personally, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a mentor, I'm a preacher. I wear all these different hats, but at the end of the day, I'm Mel Smith first. So I have to deal with me first. And a healthy person can actually help those around them, but a person that is not doing well can contaminate another person by the negative energy that they're possessing or the lack of motivation that they may have. So for me, I think it's actually creating a sense of understanding of identity, where I am, what space I am. My 100% day may not necessarily be my best, but it's my best for that particular day. So I think actually finding that place for self-care outlets, creating a great support system, and having some outlets. What are some of the hobbies and things that you can do to free yourself up? Because if you don't take care of yourself, then ultimately you will die from within. And how can you be a help to those on the outside? So for me, I think self-care is number one. And as it relates to the family as a whole, I think it's actually creating a sense of belonging. Where do I fit? And when I say belonging, promoting resilience in the sense of, okay, family, what do we do as far as our core competencies as a family? How do I connect? Because each person is different. And sometimes we put a standard or norm, but the normalcy, that eccentric child or that eccentric person may be just a little bit different, but that's the uniqueness or the creation in which God formed us and fashioned us. So I'll never stifle one's potential or dream of creativity. I'm trying to help them to discover to be the best person that they can be, despite some of the things that the system has put in place to label them in one category.
No, and it's good that you kind of are referring back to that idea of that self-care and being able to kind of, you have to reflect on where you are first. And then from there, you kind of move forward and make the steps that you need to support the people around you. So that's extremely important. I often try to support my clients when I see them in the office, and I tell them we have to identify our feelings accurately for us to do something about them. And I think how we feel determines how we behave and how we act and the way that others perceive us, right? So I realize too, in the work that I do, a lot of us don't really have feeling words. We don't know a lot of emotions outside of happy or sad. And so when our kids are going through things, we're like, okay, you're not happy, you're not sad. I don't know what you are. So it's easier to avoid or ignore that because we don't know how to handle that situation. So Ms. Natalie, I'm setting you up for a question from a professional perspective, but I'm gonna give a little context, if you will. So I use what we call the feeling wheel, and it literally is a wheel of feelings. So all these different words. So if someone is scared, right? That's an emotion. But within that, they can be anxious, they can be threatened, they can be nervous. These are all three different things. I often tell people if it's a different word, it's probably a different thing. So we want to keep that in mind. And so as you self-reflect, I want the listeners to make sure that they have something tangible that they can practice now from this conversation to use with their kids, first with themselves and then with their children. So tell yourself, if you aren't identifying your feelings, I want you to look up the feeling wheel. Go on Google. Google Clip Arts. It's free access to information on our nice expensive cell phones that we carry around in our hands on a daily basis. Look it up and just see, how are you actually feeling? Because some days you may not be sad. You may be disappointed. You may be exhausted. You may be hurt, frustrated. These are different feelings. And oftentimes, if we identify how we feel correctly, we can address that appropriately and we get an outcome that we actually want. So Natalie, from your perspective, if you can share some of the ways that you would probably coach a parent, not only in dealing with their own feelings or the ones that they have addressed or have not addressed. I'll start there. How would you kind of coach them with identifying that so they can be more in tune with themselves?
Yeah. Well, part of that is taking that time out for that self-care. And part of that self-care requires some self-reflection. So I do encourage people to journal, and sometimes sitting with an emotion is important. So although we do get uncomfortable, and you mentioned it, right? When we're uncomfortable with a feeling, when we're uncomfortable with a situation, our tendency is to dismiss, push aside, avoid, pretend it's not there, right? That's our tendency. And I get that, right? Because we're trying to survive. But again, I tell people too, in that tendency, when we're pushing things to the side, the stuff doesn't disappear. The stuff piles up, and it's piling up, and we're piling up, because as long as we live this life, there's lots of beautiful experiences, and there's going to be a lot of experiences that's really, really tough, right? That's really hurtful, that's emotional. And when we're pushing those things aside, here we are now we're creating a pile and creating a pile. And that's the burden we start to carry. And kids experience that too. So I want to make sure parents understand that. Kids, again, are humans, and they go through things. They go through pain and hurt, disappointment, although they don't have the words to express it, which is why the feeling wheel is important, right? Helping people identify their feelings. And so some of the things I tell my clients to do, my parents to do with their kids is, again, we're models, right? When I feel something and I can say it out loud, I'm teaching my child, oh, it's okay to share a feeling. If I'm upset and frustrated, I have an 18-year-old son. So at times when I'm upset and frustrated, I'm upset and frustrated right now. This is what I'm going to do to calm down. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm going through, right? So in expressing that, then it gives him permission to talk about that, right? And so again, with kids, because we are the adults, hopefully we know more. As kids are experiencing these different emotions, or they're going through these different actions, or they're behaving or they're thinking, part of our job as parents is to help them figure out what's going on, right? It looks like you're upset. Are you upset? What's going on with you? And we need to have conversations. We need to slow down enough to have conversations so we can get to the root of it, right? Because again, most people know happy, mad, and sad, right?
Yeah.
Happy, mad, sad, right? But there's a whole lot of other things underlying the sad and underlying the mad, right? And again, going back to the school system, a lot of our kids, again, present very angry. And again, there's a lot of layers under that anger. We see anger, we see mad, we see that fact that they're just bad. But again, we got to stop to ask those deeper questions as to what's going on with them for them to be presenting this way, for them to be feeling this way. And sometimes kids don't have the words, and it's our job as the adults and as parents to give them the vocabulary, to give them the tools so that they could articulate and get into their feelings and understand their. So what I often tell people is it's important to become aware and notice your feelings, emotions, as well as your thoughts, the things you say to yourself, the things we say to ourselves. Start paying attention to that, as well as our actions, right? So our thoughts influences how we feel, which also then influences our actions as well, right? And on top of all that, there's also our body sensations, because our body talks to us. We're a whole being, right? And our heart beat fast, there's something going on. And so it's not always just a physical problem, right? Just like we go to the medical doctors for things. But again, all these things, our mental health impacts all of that as well, impacts our body. So when we have headaches, when we have stomach aches, so when kids are saying their stomach hurts, yes, it could simply be they ate something and their stomach just doesn't feel good, and it's a medical issue, but it could also be something else. It could be anxiety, because when I'm anxious, my stomach does all kind of stuff.
I need your ebook, I need your ebook on how to find these signs, because we have to get this information for the parents. So I believe you with that nugget. If you haven't written it yet, girlfriend, please do send me 3 copies. You understand? So that we can go ahead and get that information out there. I'm just saying it's important, because we don't know all the connections, but all of our perspectives are so important and helpful. So I'm very thankful that we're able to have this conversation from so many different angles. We are wrapping up, and for anyone who's been listening this evening, thank you guys so much for being a part of this, because I hope it's helpful for you. One thing that I want to say as we wrap up is make sure that you guys, if you are a parent who is more on the same train as we are, where you're open, you're accepting, and you're aware of the things that our children may be experiencing, especially when it comes to mental health, please do your part to better advocate for those parents who don't know what to say, who don't know what questions to ask. And so if you're not seeing things at your school for these kids, or for the families that attend your school to have different services, say something, speak up, ask about, what's the initiative? Are there newsletters going out for mental health? We know COVID has been difficult for a lot of us, for all of us, really. So if you're more, hip with it and you're willing to have the conversation, do it for the parent next to you who may not be ready to say, I need help. But if they see that information come across an email, a text, maybe they'll take that step. And you can thank yourself later, they'll thank you at some point. But the goal is we have to help each other and build this community. So if everyone can just give me a few very brief thoughts on what it is that you want to just leave the audience with when it comes to your perspective on our conversation this evening. I'd love to hear that, starting with Ms. Eva. What would you like to say to the people?
What I would like to say to the people is, number 1, take a deep breath. Number 2, it's going to be okay. Number 3, you're not alone. So while we are only 4 people in this arena, kind of giving a voice to mental health awareness, a voice to mental health stigma when it comes to kids, there are so many more people who are just as plugged in, who are just as tuned in, who are just as supportive. Even though COVID kind of shut a lot of things down, one of the silver linings in it, without taking away the respect of the people who have lost their lives, is that there's so much more information that literally is right at our fingertips if we're willing to be open, if we're willing to do the work, if we're willing to receive what there is to have out there. So you don't have to be alone. You don't have to feel like you're by yourself. Just reach out. And like we said, closed mouths don't get fed, but there are people out there who are ready and willing to help. And you got this.
Absolutely. Yeah, come on, you got this. You must. Okay. If you do it for you, then you do it for the kids. In that order. In that order.
Period.
Okay, come on now. Mr. Mel, what you got? What do you want to tell to the people when it comes to children's mental health?
I think number one for me, the nuggets I would like to leave with everyone is simply this. Be aware of your feelings and name those feelings. Be able to label what that feeling really is. And even outside of naming that feeling, also accept all of your emotions. It's when we suppress those feelings and emotions and we don't have a safe place to share those emotions, we feel like it's not natural. It can't be understood. But ultimately, everybody has a moment where we have feelings and emotions. So being able to identify what those are and what some of those triggers would be as you reflect back on some of your previous actions, but finding that safe space and that safe support system. But for me, I say collectively as a group, we have to work together to make life better. And you have to identify who's going to be your support system. But ultimately, when you have feelings, it's okay. Just make sure you respond the right way based on those feelings and be able to label them and then actually have people around you that will love you while you're having those moments. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I say God is still our source and he provides us with resources. So I'm just glad to be on this segment. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. And speaking of responding appropriately, Miss Natalie, what do you tell to the people who they have identified the feelings and they don't know? What are you going to leave with those on the next steps to make sure that they respond appropriately and they make the appropriate next steps?
Again, to piggyback on Miss Eva and Mr. Mel, it's again, people have to really take the time to identify their needs. Our needs is not everybody else's needs. I know we're in a world where we do a lot of comparisons with social media. There's a lot of comparisons that's happening. So oftentimes people question and judge what's going on with themselves because it looks different for so-and-so. And again, it's really about you. And so finding that quiet space, that safe space to figure out what is it that I need? What is it that my family needs? What is it that my children needs? And moving forth in that way and seeking services and seeking resources and tools in that way and listening to your own voice, your gut and all of that. So that's what I'm leaving people with.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for all of your input. We just want to make sure that everyone remembers you are an expert in yourself. No one knows you better than you do. And if we take control of that, if we take that energy back, it allows us to do the things that we need to make sure we are taking care of ourselves and those around us. So for all those who listen this evening, thank you guys so much. I just want to remind everyone that next Friday, we will be talking about triumph over trauma. And so make sure that you tune back in at 7 o'clock. But other than that, if we have no other comments, I enjoyed myself. This was fun, having this conversation. And we have to do this again because it's a journey. It's a continuous journey. But, if you want to do something tomorrow, reach out to your schools, reach out to your classmates, your coworkers, anyone, and make sure that you get the support you need to make those next steps. So thank you guys so much for joining us on this conversation this evening.